The advisor to the president of Ukraine, Oleksiy Arestovich, mentioned today that Ukraine has won in this special military operation initiated by Russia. And while the war itself is far from being over, Ukraine is most certainly successful in its first stages. What exactly first stages of this war imply? Why Arestovich claims that Ukraine has won? What are the immediate goals and future direction of this war going forward? And these are the questions that we'll be talking about in today's video. What's up, investors? Simon Chacha and people of Reddit, it's the Russian Dude, and this is your daily update on Russian-Ukrainian war as of Tuesday, May 31st. You can see the main events of the day to my right, along with the timestamps. Okay, so today in his daily interview/war report, advisor to President of Ukraine, Oleksiy Arestovich, mentioned that Ukraine has completely won in this special military operation. But then he added that the war is still going on, and most likely it will last for a way longer time than we all anticipated. And so here is exactly what it all means. According to him and Russia, at least at some point in the past, the main purpose of this special military operation was to liberate Ukraine from Nazis and liberate the regions of Donbass. And yes, of course I know that the goals of military operations have been changing almost every single week, but this was one of the main original ones. And so the reason why Arestovich says that Russia has failed in this case, it is because simply the advancement of Russia is so much more harder than anticipated, and they were not able to achieve any of its goals so far. It all started with the simultaneous invasion from the north, east and south. And as for now, the only territory which is still under heavy siege from Russia is only the east of Ukraine. And so Ukraine was able to liberate completely the north of the country, while the south of the country is being extremely complicated for Russians, especially after Ukrainian forces were able to sink the Russian Navy flagship Moskva. Because of this, Russia had to switch their attention to the east, specifically in only Donbass region, which consists of two main big territories, Lugansk and Donetsk. But as for now, Russia moved forward and they reduced their goal from liberating the entire Donbass just to at least Lugansk region. And that is basically exactly what you can see on this map presented to us by the Ministry of Defense of the United Kingdom. As for now, the main goal of Russia in this region is to capture the city of Severodonetsk, which later on gives them access to another major city called Lysychansk. And after this, the liberation of Lugansk region can be kinda claimed successful by Russia. And as of recently, Arestovich himself reported that unfortunately Russia was able to capture the city of Severodonetsk. But Russia should not celebrate their victory way too early, simply because the majority of Russian forces were transported into that region. And because of this, Russia had greater presence in this region rather than Ukrainian army, and they were able to capture the city. And even though they were able to do this, the numbers of Russian forces significantly decreased everywhere else. But Oleksiy Arestovich also says that the capture of Severodonetsk does not make too much sense, especially with the amount of effort that Russia did. His reasoning for this is because the next city of Lysychansk geographically is higher than Severodonetsk, and Lysychansk at this very moment is populated with Ukrainian army, which basically means in order for Russia to advance further, they will have to fight uphill, which is, if you know the very basics of the art of war, it's not the best case scenario. Arestovich says that even though Russia was able to capture the city of Severodonetsk, the advancement further will be much more harder. In addition to that, the general of the Ukrainian army, Mykola Malamush, says that the turning point in this war, especially in the region of Donbass, will be within the next couple of weeks. And the reason for this, it is because approximately in this time frame, this is when Ukraine will start receiving Western offensive weapons, especially the ones that America sends to Ukraine through Land-Lease Act, and the majority of these weapons are already traveling through the ocean. So yes, just like I predicted in my previous videos, I still honestly think that the counteroffensive, successful counteroffensive of Ukraine might start somewhere in the middle of this summer. And by the way, if you like this style of daily news reporting, feel free to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also, please make sure to check the link in the description if you wish to receive additional content such as daily Zoom calls and Q&A sessions. All the proceeds will be donated to Ukraine at the end of each month. Thanks so much, and let's continue. Welcome to another episode of Ridiculous Russian Propaganda. And today we're going to talk about this article from far-right magazine American Thinker, which is heavily discussed by Russian officials. The article basically claims that the mercenaries which are fighting for Ukraine came there with only one purpose, and the main purpose of their presence in this war is to steal as much weapons as possible. Later on, they can do either of these two things with these stolen weapons. First of all, they can obviously sell this on the black market and profit themselves. And the second reason is that these mercenaries listeners, will use these stolen weapons to do terroristic acts in their own countries. So yes, while the article might sound a little bit absurd by an unproven media source which is only 17 years old, the Russian officials discuss it as the main statement from the White House itself. They basically go forth and say, see, we told you, Ukraine is full of terrorists and Nazis, and now they're gonna do terroristic acts in your own countries, and that is why Russia is protecting the entire world. And the conclusion of the Russian side of this article is that America is basically sponsoring future terrorism on its own territory. Today, the intercepted communications of Russian generals Vitaly Kovtun and Maxim Vlasov were released. And boy oh boy, these are extremely interesting conversations. So long story short, they were both criticizing the Minister of Defense of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, and the President Vladimir Putin. And during their critique, they were not afraid of using extremely explicit language. The language which basically gives them one-way ticket to Siberia in case these communications are released to the public. And so one Ukrainian journalist was able to take an interview with Vitaly Kovtun. The journalist started with the question, why would you give an order to bomb and destroy civilian buildings? And in response to that, the Russian general said, well, it's such a BS, I never gave such an order. And then the journalist played a specific part of the recording where the general was specifically giving an order to destroy as many buildings as possible to make Ukrainians afraid. The response of Vitaly Kovtun, yes, so what? And then the journalist asked the second question, have you ever criticized Sergei Shoigu or Vladimir Putin? Vitaly Kovtun obviously replied like, why would I do it? These are my commanders and basically they're my boss. And then the journalist started playing the part where Vitaly Kovtun himself calls Sergei Shoigu and Vladimir Putin the worst names possible. And the final question from the Ukrainian journalist was like, do you want me to make these recordings public? And the obvious response of the Russian general was like, no, don't do it. Ukrainian journalist proceeds with asking, why don't you want to do it? Don't you want to be heard? And Vitaly Kovtun responds is like, no, I don't want. The Secretary of the Security Council of Russia, Nikolai Patrushev, who is by the way one of the potential successors of Vladimir Putin as the president of Russia, said that Poland wants to capture and invade Ukraine. This statement, I think, shows that Vladimir Putin found a perfect success for himself. The main reasoning that Patrushev gave for his statement was the following. He said that, you remember, not that long time ago, the president of Poland, Andrzej Duda, visited Ukraine, and he said that in the future he hopes that there will be no borders between Poland and Ukraine. What would every single person with the basic common sense would understand from this statement is that Poland simply wants Ukraine to be its ally and its neighbor. What Andrzej Duda meant is that he wants both countries to have as much close cooperation as possible. But that's not how you interpret this statement if your name is Nikolai Patrushev. In this case, your interpretation would be the following. Oh, of course, it definitely means that Poland wants to capture the west of Ukraine. At this very moment, this is just the statement that he made, and I'm pretty surprised that they still don't have yet undeniable proof. The president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, made an extremely interesting statement today about the potential friendly fire with Putin. His more or less exact quote was the following: we just need to take a look at Ukraine and then we realize that this is the scenario that could have happened in Belarus. What he probably meant here is that in case he did not win in his previous Belarusian presidential elections, probably Russia will have to liberate Belarus. Because as we all already know, Alexander Lukashenko is an extremely pro-Russian president, which allows Putin to control Belarus as well. And in case he did not win the presidential elections and God forbid for Russia there will be opposition force in power, in this case Russia will have to liberate poor Belarus from these filthy oppositioners so they can then bring their old pal back, Alexander Lukashenko. Today, the European Union has approved the 6th package of sanctions against Russia. And the main positions that this package includes are the following. First of all, the European Union will limit the 2/3 of Russian oil supply. The second is the removal of Russian biggest bank, Sberbank, from the international SWIFT system. And other positions include the limit of Russian TV channels in the European Union, as well as the increase of sanctions list against Russians. It is also estimated that the European Union is planning to get rid of approximately 90% of Russian oil imports by the end of 2022. EU. But this package of sanctions also comes with certain limitations. For example, the country of Hungary will be excluded from Russian oil embargo, which basically means that the country will be able to continue buying Russian oil. And in addition to Hungary, Czech Republic and Slovakia were also excluded from this embargo. And it is estimated that these three countries will be putting approximately $6 billion per year into Russian budget. And speaking about sanctions, it is estimated that approximately 86.8% of Russian companies are affected by Western sanctions. And among them, approximately 11.7% of companies were not able to adapt to the current world scenario. That is why they had to shut down their operations. The European Commission announced that the application of Ukraine to join the European Union will be reviewed next month in June. In addition to Ukraine, the applications from Moldova and Georgia will also be reviewed. And just as a reminder, Russia was previously very unhappy about the possibility of Ukraine joining the European Union. And that is why in 2014 the infamous Maidan happened. Since then, Ukraine was not able to join the Union, but they obviously always wanted to do this. And now, since the war started and there are way more pressing issues at this very moment, both for Russia and Ukraine initiated once again their application to join the European Union. But this time, at least it looks like that Russia is not opposing that much this opportunity of Ukraine. So because of this, Ukraine already completed and submitted its first two parts of the initial story to join the alliance, and now they're just basically awaiting the decision. But no, it does not mean that Ukraine will join the European Union in June of this year. Once again, next month only their application will be reviewed to see whether they can join or not. And then, if the European Union decides to proceed with the application of Ukraine, only then the application process will start, which can take up to several years. Thank you so much for your attention, check the link in the description, stay safe and see you tomorrow.